Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to Criminological Theory and Introduction again today. Just continuing on from the last video and get more in depth to the theory itself. But within the last video, we discussed what theories were, what knowledge is, and how that theories help the progression of knowledge, and what science is, and how that underlies how knowledge is formulated in paradigms, and how paradigms are these collective schools of thoughts where certain assumptions uh, are are um, are made. That theories kind of that underlie theoretical development, right? So theory paradigms are more this macro level perspective, right? In the classical paradigm, it's the idea that people have free will, right? And that's why they commit crime, because and that's why you should institute a system that the punishment just outweighs the benefit to be had from committing a crime. So these are all perspectives we discussed in the last film. In this one, we're going to continue on with theory, and instead of looking at this macro level perspective, this large scale perspective, we're going to become more individualized, right? More micro level. Look at the individual theories themselves and how individual theory can progress through testing, through empirical assessment. So theory is a set of logically interrelated propositions used to explain an outcome. So discussed this in the last video as well. It's more complex than just a statement. Um, there's a number of propositions. It offers a set of propositions. So it's a number of different factors can cause the outcome. So in criminal justice, we're concerned with explaining why crime occurs, why deviance occurs, how does the system respond to criminals, why does victimization occur. So these things exist. So theory in a nutshell, in its easiest manner, is explanation of why something occurs. All right. But take, for example, I got a couple examples we'll work through real quickly. In deterrence theory, there's three distinct propositions, right? That there's a level of certainty of being caught for committing a crime, that the severity of the punishment exceeds the benefit to be had from committing the crime, and that the criminal justice system acts swiftly in enforcing that punishment or that sanction, all right, and thus an individual will be deterred. This is all theoretical, right? So this is the theory of deterrence, and it's what the criminal justice system in this country essentially is based on, right? The severity of the crime. The Eighth Amendment, no cruel and unusual punishment, right? People are guaranteed a speedy trial, right? And all those types of things. The level of certainty, how is that assessed? Well, we have prisons out there, we have police officers out there, and all these different things that, well, I see a police officer right there, I'm not going to go shoot somebody. Maybe, right? I don't know. Some people probably do. But anyways, that's what the whole intent of. That's what these propositions really get into. And these things can be tested, right? Tested for everything, and some people want to do assessments, try and test all three propositions or 4 or 5 or 8 propositions of a theory in one assessment, but generally it's done by testing just the severity, right? So there'll be an examination on whether or not the death penalty deters people from committing capital murder, right? Or whether or not, you know, any type of thing, right? If the So I got another example I'm going to get into. I don't want to waste too much time. I know it'll take too much time. So an example of social learning theory. This is another theoretical perspective for why a crime occurs. So it essentially, the propositions associated with social learning theory is differential association, essentially hanging out with people that are different from societal norms, differential reinforcement, essentially hanging out with delinquent people or people who commit crimes or whatever that go against whatever society say is normal. Differential reinforcement, being reinforced for that differential behavior, that different behavior, right? So if you're hanging out with drug dealers, it's more likely you're going to be doing drugs or selling drugs as well. You get reinforced for that drug dealing by getting paid a lot of money, perhaps. Being exposed to definitions favorable to crime, and imitation. So these are the 4 propositions that Akers really talked about, and this has gone through significant development over the last 40, 50 years, right? And Bandura and psychological perspectives and how it's applied. So, and even Sutherland, with the differential association theory. But we'll talk about social learning theories at a later date in this course. So really what theory is a set of logically interrelated propositions used to explain an outcome. So within propositions, these are concepts. Differential association is a concept. Definitions, imitation, differential reinforcement is a concept. Certainty, severity, and swiftness, these are all concepts. You know how I know they're concepts? They're abstract tags that you place on reality. But what does differential association look at? You can't put it in a lineup and pick it out, right? You can't put differential reinforcement in a lineup and pick it out, or imitation, or severity, or swiftness, right? It's an abstract tag we place on reality. It can't be observed directly. So they're mental ideas. They're fuzzy, abstract ideas, all right? That's what a concept is, and that is what a proposition essentially within theories are made of, all right? So delinquency, for example, or love even, or gravity, all these different things, you can't see it. What does gravity feel like, or what does love feel like, right? Everybody's going to have their own different explanation. You can't put it in a lineup, like I said, or take a picture of it. I guess you can, supposedly, but it's all subjective, right? There's abstract. It's very abstract. It's like art. So, and that's what a concept essentially is. So this is what a theory is. What really, breaking down a theory for itself. It's a set of logically interrelated propositions. Propositions themselves are comprised of concepts, and concepts are abstract tags placed on reality. So how does knowledge move forward? If everything is in this philosophical, metaphysical domain that can't be assessed, that you can't really observe directly, right? Well, that's where variables come into play, right? And variables are concepts that have been operationalized, essentially. So they explain, they can vary or take on values of different quantitative nature generally. There can be qualitative variables and quantitative variables. Quantitative is numeric data, qualitative is non-numeric data, essentially. Generally, if you want to think of little stories or vignettes or watching news reports and somebody telling a story, that's more of a qualitative in nature. We're doing an observation, all right? But operationalization defines how concepts are measured, all right? It's taking these concepts, these abstract things, and trying to assess them in reality, in an empirical world, and placing an operational definition to it, okay? So socioeconomic status, what is low? What is middle class? What is high class, right? Or upper class, I guess. I don't know. What is lower class? So it can mean a lot of things to anybody, right? It could be when you didn't take home $15,000 last year, or you didn't get 10,000, or you didn't make 50,000. Some people might consider that low class, lower on the socioeconomic status, right? Or what is middle class? Nobody. So it's important to look at these types of things and definitions, religion, gender, and all these different things. So this is how, and those things can be quantified, or they can, depending on your levels of measurement, but that's a methodological concern. I'm not going to really talk about that right now. So theory exists within this metaphysical domain, right? It's where concepts and theory exist. It's really where philosophy and theory is. It's all these concepts. It's logical. It should be consistent. It's got these propositions, right? So down here, so I put a line here to try and look at the philosophical domain versus reality. So that's what we're interested in. This is how knowledge is going to progress. So in the physical domain, we got a theory. For a theory to be efficient, for a theory to be good, legitimate, you need to be able to test it empirically, observe what's going on. So you take a theory, whatever theory it is, let's say it's deterrence, all right? Since we've already talked about it. We want to see if that holds weight. So we want to see if the severity of the punishment will deter people from committing a crime. So we want to test capital punishment, right? So we can test it. We can compare it from states that have capital punishment versus states that don't, and determine whether or not the capital murder rates are the same or different or higher or lower from state to state, from location, jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And then we can go from there, based from the results from this empirical domain, and refine our theory, all right? And if it supports the theory, well, we can advance it one way, or if it doesn't, then we can adjust it and do that. Then we can do another observation. Then we can refine our theory again, and then test it again. And refine the theory and test it. Refine, test, refine, test. Keep going through this process. And that's how really knowledge develops scientifically. All right? You're taking these concepts and these constructs, and you're trying to test them in the empirical world. All right? Let's take another example and just work through a couple real quick. So, love, right? I said before, love is essentially it's a concept. It's theoretical. Right? You can't put it in front of the lamp. You can't see what it looks like, right? So how could we test this in the empirical world, in a quantitative world, even qualitatively to some degree? So we can say, that your significant other buy you flowers. Well, they buy you flowers, that means they love you, right? Then we go back and see, perhaps, because maybe they're buying you flowers because it's not only love, but perhaps it's guilt as well. Maybe they cheated on them. Maybe they got in a fight and they bought them flowers or whatever, right? If they cheated on you, they probably don't love you. So we go back and refine our theory. So we can go and add another assessment. Do they call you? All right? If they would love you, did they give you a diamond ring? All these different factors. So we can test it multiple different ways because there is a potential that, well, love does, if they're buying their significant other flowers, that it is love, right? Maybe that's 60% of the time, maybe that's 70% of the time, maybe it's 90% of the time. But there is going to be periods of time where perhaps that individual does feel guilty. Maybe they did cheat on, maybe they were whatever, right? Forgot to pick them up at the airport, whatever, right? All these different things that could perhaps occur. So that's error. And that's the problem with taking things that exist within this philosophical domain and then testing them empirically. So that's why you need to replicate test over and over and over, different methods and different ways. Right? So let's take delinquency or deviance. Right? So we want to see if kids are deviant these days. So how do we assess that? We can see if the kids are smoking tobacco or chewing tobacco. Right? And we go do an assessment. Only 5% of kids in high school are doing that, right? Well, perhaps that's not an adequate assessment of what deviance is or delinquency is. So we need to refine it. We need to change it because things have changed. Kids are switching to the vaping now. Instead of smoking tobacco, they're going to the vaping, right? We find out about 20% of those kids are using vaping because tobacco is pretty deviant at this point. And even there, that doesn't get the full picture. So we can go back and refine our theory and include marijuana. We can include property crimes. We can include all these different things. So we can, in our assessments, in our empirical assessment. So it's trying to capture what delinquency is. We're just looking at an indicator of tobacco is problematic because you're going to lose a lot of people here and here. So you want to get the full range because you're trying to take things that exist in this metaphysical domain and test them in the real world, an empirical domain. All right, and that leaves air. And there's no way to capture all this air that's going to come from here to here. All right, what we do is limit that by replicating tests, including more measures, and refining theories and moving forward with knowledge. Okay. So what underlies this is science, and that's essentially how science progresses. Progresses knowledge. So science in and of itself is probabilistic in nature. This is where statistics and research methods come into play. So they're working with probabilities. True scientists are going to work with probabilities. All right? If you're looking for a cure for a flu or a virus that's going around causing the pandemic, you got a high threshold that you have to ensure. All right? Because what if down the line, 10 years from now, that vaccine is giving everybody cancer, right? So you want to test these things, test them again, test them again, test them again. Have a theory that this drug is going to work. Well, test it, give it time because there's lag time and all these other factors. So, and they're not going to say 100% of the time, even if they do get a cure, all right? Even if it's penicillin and you're talking about a sexually transmitted disease, all right? Sometimes it's not going to work, right? So that's why we're working with probabilities. You see on Dr. Phil, right? Or whoever, they're like, oh, I'm 99% sure that you're the father, or Maury Povich, right? The DNA test. Well, nobody's going to ever say 100%. It might be 99.99999%, but there's still that 0.0001% chance that it is not, all right? And that's really what science is, because it's working with probabilities, because there is always that potential that it is not, That is not the cure. That is not the reason why they're smoking drugs. Or that is not the reason why they're assaulting people, right? So error. Error is always present when testing theory, as concepts are taken from the metaphysical domain from up here and tested in the empirical world, all right? Using proxy measures in the physical domain, proxy measure. There are numerous places where errors factor into assessing theory in social science. This is just, the above is just one, all right? This is just one place where error can come into play. But anyways, just to recap everything, I know I'm going a little long. We talked about theory as a set of logically interrelated propositions used to explain the outcome. Within theory, there are propositions, and within propositions are concepts. So from the concepts that are derived, people attempt to operationalize them into variables, define how they're going to be measured and assessed in the empirical world. And from there, the variables are tested, and that helps theoretical development and going forward. Just one note is that error is always going to be present within all these, especially within the social sciences, in criminology, criminal justice, sociology, psychology, all these things. There's going to be massive amounts of error. All right, it's not as fixed as like biology or physics or something of that nature. And even there's still many, many questions that we do not know. And 100 years from now, we'll look back at today and say, those people were not advanced at all. So just keep that stuff in mind, and hopefully this helps you out a little bit. Think about theory, why it's important, why it's relevant, and how it helps progress knowledge within society. So thank you all.